So we're back at the flat here in London and returned to the kitchen.
This is the Travelling Through podcast, where we talk about London, the world and life. I'm your host normally, but today it's me in the hot seat, and I'm being interviewed by my partner, Stephen Marriott, who is about to set up his own podcast series called Marriott's Side Trips. This is a test for him and also for me. I hope you enjoy.
We did kick off this interview with earlier, but you got all excited about the snow. We went to our local park.
We did, yes.
And yes, crunched with the snow, had a few snowball fights and warmed up back here with some coffee. And what coffee is it, Emma? Do you remember?
This is a Mexican blend, I think. It's an organic coffee. And actually, it was a Christmas present, so I can't remember exactly. But it is delicious.
I'm going to pour some for you, but
like fruity flavour.
I think it's great to have some coffee this afternoon and perk ourselves up, but also because I think it ties nicely in two ways into the fact that I know a kitchen is an important place for you.
It is.
And you are a coffee barista now, aren't you? So you ground this coffee up for us, and obviously in your bookshop-cafe travelling through, you learnt the skills of coffee grinding and making a decent cappuccino or latte. So I think it's just really nice to just tell us a bit about why kitchens are important to you and what you know about coffee now. And I should say for everybody out there that people may not know that Emma is also my partner. So she's a little bit on the spot here, and I'm going to hopefully learn a few things that I have never had the chance to ask her about in terms of past life. And, you know, obviously some thoughts and different things which we never get the chance to talk about, which are going on in our head. But, yeah, I'm intrigued just to tell me a bit more about why kitchens are important and this link with coffee and travelling through.
Okay. It's also nice that we are sitting in the kitchen, because the kitchen is one of the rooms in the house where I always feel the most relaxed when it comes to having conversations. And this goes right back to childhood. We always had our family powwows, discussions, chats, laughs, cries in the kitchen. So for me, it's very central. And it's also, I think, a very Irish thing, which my mother, being of Irish origin, although she didn't live in Ireland, she was brought up in London and in India as well. But the kitchen was always very important in her household. And so we just grew up always, even if our kitchen is small, wherever I've lived in London or around the world, it's always been the kitchen has been the central point of discussions, disclosures, whatever it is, and parties. And I'm sure that's the case for a lot of people. The best parties always end up in the kitchen. I don't know whether that's the same for you, but it certainly has been the case for me.
I do know you like a bit of kitchen dancing now and again.
I do, absolutely.
And we did do a bit of that, didn't we, on New Year's Eve here in the kitchen when, like a lot of people, there were no parties to go to this year. But that was great. So, yes. Yeah, I love that fact that it's about a sense of place and family for you by the sounds of things.
And food. And also it's cooking where people can relax, have a cup of tea. One of us might be cooking, but you're having a chat as well. And in terms of the coffee, yes, I mean, the smell of coffee in the kitchen is also, it's a feeling of home, isn't it? It's a feeling of or tea, in fact, it's exactly the same. And the coffee skills, I drank quite a bit of coffee when I lived in the Balkans, and that's a very, very strong coffee. Mm-hmm. And then coming back to the UK in 2012, it was suddenly the coffee scene had really taken off in London, and I really was very much aware of it. And then opening my bookshop and the cafe, that's when I really learnt the skills of being a barista. Not to say that I was a very good one, but I learnt a lot from it, and in the types of coffee, how you have to keep the coffee machines clean to get the best flavour, how you grind the coffee, the different grinds. It's a huge skill, and I think a lot of people drink wonderful coffee without actually realising how much goes into creating that perfect cup of coffee. And it is quite difficult to keep consistency, but that comes down to how the beans are also not only ground, but how they're roasted, so from the roastery. So there's a big thing behind it all. But I find that fascinating, and it's been great that although the bookshop now doesn't exist, I've kept the grinder. The coffee machine, unfortunately, was far too big to keep, so I sold that. So at least we can grind our coffee, and we've put it just through a French press. But it creates a lovely coffee. So.
And I have to say thank you, because I've been a big beneficiary of your coffee experiences. So cheers to that, Emma. I'll raise my mug here and chink yours. Well, obviously, as you say, with the coffee grinder here, and you taught me how to grind coffee. And so it's always a privilege to get in nice quality beans and grind the coffee and have that sort of ceremony experience, I guess. And of course, I've been a beneficiary that when you did have the physical location for the cafe and the bookshop, that I would sometimes write in the bookshop or occasionally be your assistant and help out. And yes, I was paid in lots of, not cafetières, lattes and
cake.
And cake, yes.
And the odd glass of wine.
And a glass of wine. Obviously, you moved on for the bookshop, and I want to come back to that and what took you from the Balkans to the bookshop later. But I guess what's really interesting is just to get a bit of a snippet as to what you're up to at the moment. And I know you've since at least it's last April, you started your own podcast show, which is almost a sort of evolution of going online with travelling through bookshop and other things.
Well, for those who don't know, I had a bookshop in behind Waterloo station for 5 years, and it was an amazing experience. Financially, not an amazing experience, but I think booksellers and book owners will nod and understand that situation. However, it was a very rich experience in so many other ways. And one of those ways was the fact the community really came together, and I met so many local people in the Waterloo SE1 area. And they used to come in sometimes just to say hello or have a quick cup of tea or a coffee, or came to the events in the evening. And a huge spirit, travelling through spirit, just grew or blossomed, I should say, in those 5 years. And there were a lot of people who were regulars. There were people who were literally just travelling through, had come from abroad. And it was that real sense of mix of cultures, languages, people, experiences, travellers, so much kind of knitted together in the shop. And this spirit was something that I felt an affinity with and felt very strongly to try and keep going, even though I didn't have the physical bookshop. So when I closed, many people were saying, well, what was I going to do next? And the idea eventually is to have a place somewhere abroad, which is a continuation of travelling through, but in a very different guise. But obviously we've had lockdowns and coronavirus and various other things getting in the way. So in the meantime, I thought another way would be to capture people's experiences of living in London, the travelling through shop, insights into how they see the world and life through a podcast. I've initially just focused on people who came to travelling through and has had some kind of connection with me. And just trying to keep those links alive. And I'm delighted because in the last week, end of last week, I reached over 2,000 downloads. So I'm not a Joe Rogan podcaster yet, but it's still lovely that it's being supported and listened to. So that's been one of the focuses while I closed down, because obviously I closed down the shop. Well, not obviously, but it was summer 2019. But it took almost 4 or 5 months after that, to the end of the year of 2019, to get everything finalised and the accountants doing their stuff, closing the company with Companies House, selling up books, coffee machines and all the rest of it. So 2020 last year was really when I took stock of everything and thought, right, let's do this podcast. And of course then we've been very much restrained as to what we can do, so I've just carried on with the podcast where I can, interviewing people. I think to date I've only done one via Zoom, but I think at the moment that may be what I'll have to do for the coming months, but we'll see. And also now that I have done almost a year as a podcaster, I've kind of seeing the way the podcast is going, and I'll be making some alterations to that going forward. So it's nice that, well, nice but slightly strange that I'm now in the podcasting guest seat, so I now know how they feel rather than always being the host. So
I think that's really interesting what you talked about, the community and spirit of travelling through as a physical shop and location. And as we all know, it's very important. Everybody has a Kindle who loves books, but obviously for me, you never replace the physical feeling of that sort of coffee-stained book that, you know, becomes a bit of a friend sometimes and goes with you everywhere, whether it's on the train or at home or in bed. And so I love the fact that a community spirit was created there at travelling through, and it hasn't been lost because of your podcast, and it's evolving now. And I know that your book group who a lot of people from the Waterloo SE1 community now, they've taken that online via Zoom, etc. And so they continue to meet in that way. And hopefully they will go back to being a local community book group in due course when they can. But sorry, you were going to say?
No, I was going to say that's true. I mean, the fact is the book club continued, and that was my big surprise, is actually when the shop closed, the book club continued face to face for the following 6 months. 8 months before, in fact, the first lockdown. And then they said, well, we can't just stop. We've got to keep going. So that's why they introduced Zoom chats, and I've attended a couple of those. But I mean, in terms of books as well, just what you were saying about the well-worn books, but what's so nice for books also is not only the books that are your friends that you may read over and over again, there are also those books that are very special books that are, I don't know, in a very a place in the bookshelf that's harder to reach or a bit more protected, that you take down now and again, and they're the very special books that you almost treat with just very carefully. So there's two sides, and the way the books are going, and you're talking about Kindles, and I think a lot of books have become a lot cheaper. But on the other side, there's a lot of books that I would rather give a book to a friend for Christmas or for birthday. And that's very important. And I think books, the meaning behind books and the way we treat books may change in the future. They'll become almost like special gifts. I don't know, but...
Well, I think stories, people, we all love stories, podcasting and people's personal stories, their journeys, fictional stories. Stories will never be lost, will they? It's just the way they're presented.
Exactly.
And I still, for me, the physical book, and as you say, that special book on the bookshelf, which, there are some books which you just return to in life for whatever reason when you need them as a reminder, or they just take you to a place. I think there's something that's something special when you reach for that book in that sense. You're saying about the community of the bookshop and the friends or people you've met in that community. And of course, we met over 5 years ago now through the bookshop.
We did.
I think it's interesting that, your bookshop has been a connecting point for so many people and for us. Yeah, nice memories.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
But we can't talk all about our past lives. We're here to talk about you, which of course is past life is how we got to here now. But I want to know, talking about sort of where one is now, and I know you grew up in Edinburgh in Scotland, and you have done lots of different career things which we'll come on to, including living overseas in the Balkans and France. And now you're here at the moment in London doing podcasting. You've had the bookshop. Did you envisage having this kind of life when you were a young girl in Scotland and growing up?
I don't think I really knew what I was going to do with my life, if truth be known.
I don't think that many people do really know, do they? I think they have sort of daydreams and those sort of things. But
growing up, I very much had my head in the clouds. I ran around a lot, climbed trees, played a lot of sport. I didn't. I suppose the quick answer to that question is no. I had no idea. At one point, I wanted to go into forestry.
Okay.
My mother was so horrified at the thought that I wanted to be. She just saw me as a lumberjack or something. She said, absolutely no way am I going to allow my daughter to go off to that. That's a ridiculous idea. And at the time I didn't really have the strength of character, shall we say, to put my foot down and say, I will do that.
And how old were you then, do you think, when you thought you wanted to go into forestry? Which is interesting,
17.
I think, outdoors and nature, which I know you love nature.
Yeah, 17.
Okay.
So, yeah. So I suppose that was one thing. I also had I still do have my godfather was in Australia. So that was always in the back of my mind. I wanted to go to Australia to see him. I didn't know when that was going to be or whatever. But apart from that, I had no real idea. I think for a couple of years when I was 18, I felt a bit trapped, but I didn't know how to get out of that trap. And I think that's all a part of your growing up, but you don't know how to grow, you don't know how to get away from, you don't really know what the problem is at that point.
Okay.
And I was never a child that shouted and yelled at people and had a furious temper or stormed around. So I wasn't quite sure how my life was going to change. I knew it was going to at some point. but I wasn't quite sure how I was going to get there. I did think by the age, I was only 18, I was 17 at the time, so, but I thought by the time I was 27, which actually was very old, I felt at that time, I would probably be married.
So not when you were 27, you thought
when I was 17.
You thought by the time I'd be 27.
By the time I was 27, I'd probably be married and on the way to having about 4 kids.
Okay, so that idea had
had
gone through your head at some point.
Yeah,
that you
it did.
Okay,
yes, but but life got in the way of all of that, and that didn't happen. But I have no je ne regrette rien, as they say.
Yes.
And no regrets, because that's the course life took me down. And not to say that at some points I thought that might happen, it could have done, but it didn't. And destiny, or whatever, fate, whatever you want to call it, had other ideas for me.
Sounds not to me that you didn't have this desire. You knew you wouldn't stay in Edinburgh by the sounds of things, although it sounds like quite an idyllic childhood, outdoors, running around and things like that.
Yeah, cycling down to Cramond, and I had I was given a sense of freedom, and my parents were they weren't controlling like that. You had to be home by a certain time, but during the day I would just say, I'm off for a cycle ride, and they would never say, well, where are you going, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. I'd just go. And sometimes
from Edinburgh.
Yeah, in Edinburgh, and you just cycle off, and because we lived in various places in Edinburgh, and I would just disappear.
Okay.
Just go off cycling and exploring, and I suppose maybe that's the early days of me going off by myself and exploring.
Mm-hmm. So when you say explore, sort of
places that you.
So you just take yourself off on your bike and go for little micro adventures.
I would.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly. And then obviously when you leave school, it changed a bit, and I had to think about what I was doing, and I had no idea, and I wasn't allowed to go and learn forestry. So my mum said, well, you should go and do a secretarial course, and I did. I followed what she said.
In London?
No, in Edinburgh.
Oh, in Edinburgh. Okay, you did the secretarial course. I didn't know that. Okay.
For about a year. Learned shorthand and typing, and I hated every moment of it. Didn't talk to my mother for the whole year I was doing it, because I blamed her for putting.
So you didn't go on to do a degree then? That this was after what you called the Highers, was it? In school.
Yeah.
So after your A-level equivalent.
Yes. Exactly.
Right. Okay. So it sounds like secretarial work really wasn't for you, given your reaction to your mum.
No, it wasn't. But having said that, I'm very grateful to her that I did it, because it actually gave me a whole heap of skills, like how to use a keyboard, and how to do shorthand, and how to shortcut certain things in life, actually.
Okay.
So it was actually, even though I hated it at the time horrendously, and I worked for a company in Edinburgh for a short period of time, it was a stepping stone for me to go to London and to do just contract secretarial work. And then eventually I joined an accountancy firm in graduate recruitment. So it was a skill, and if anything, that's something I've learned, that's sometimes the skills that you really think there can't possibly be anything to come out of it. When you start to think sideways, you realise you can use skills in other ways, and for me that was a salutary lesson, or humbling lesson as well. That actually it allowed me not only to go to London and then get a job that was paid double what I was earning in Edinburgh, but it also gave me the chance to save money and then to go travelling. And as a result of having those skills while I was travelling, I could do contract work, and so I could travel for a while, stop, work, earn some more money, save money, and then do another. But at the time, all I could see was, I hate doing this. But even though I hated doing it, in me is always a sense I want to do it to the best of my ability. Mm-hmm. So I still did it well, and I was good at it. It was a challenging time, but But it paid off, really. So I have no regrets about it again.
And did though?
My poor mother just suffered. My hands are not wanting to talk to her.
Well, I mean, obviously, it gave you administrational skills, organisational skills, and transferable skills to other jobs to travel. Which
I think probably one of the reasons also is because I had my heart set on going to college or going to university, like quite a few of my friends were doing.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. But then, as it turned out, it just wasn't the right time, because that time did come along later for me, but on my terms and on something that I wanted to study and I knew I wanted to do. So life has a pattern that a lot of people follow. And they think, well, you go to school, then you have a year out, then you go to university, then you do this, then you do that, then you get married, then you have kids, and then the cycle continues. And when you interrupt that cycle, it almost puts you on a different path. And as a result, it makes you think very differently to other people around you. And that's something I suppose I've realised that, and in the end, if you want to get on the same path as everybody else, you can do. But you've also been offered an opportunity to go down a different path. And it's how you then view that path as something that is an opportunity or as a rejection or something that makes you not be accepted. Do you see what I mean? You can, because makes you different, and it's then how you view that difference as being something to your advantage or being something negative. And it's and I learned that was something that I learned very early on, I suppose. Sometimes you actually end up not liking yourself because you feel you've been pushed down a path because you weren't strong enough to stand up for yourself. But at the same time, I did go down that path. I learned a lesson, and I also learned then how to stand up for myself and to start to have my own opinions about things.
But it must have been intimidating when you first came to London, fairly young still, not having been, sort of leaving home in the sense of when you're a graduate, you ease yourself into it because you're with other people in the same boat, you're in halls of residence, etc. Was it an intimidating experience, arriving off the coach or bus in London? Yeah,
I mean, yes, it was very intimidating because Edinburgh at that time in the 70s and 80s is not the city it is today. And I was very green between the ears in many, many ways. And suddenly I was thrust into the city life full of so many things, sights, smells, people, cultures, opportunities. You don't know where to look. And also so many people just having to stand on your own 2 feet and do everything for yourself. It was a shock, but it didn't take long to find my feet. And I wasn't totally alone because my cousin on my mother's side, who was brought up down in England, she just moved to London. I shared a flat with her and a couple of other people above a pawnbroker's shop. Okay,
what part of London was that?
It was in Fulham, at the other end of the Dawes Road, near Lily Road. And above this pawnbroker shop, you ran down. The floor was slanted such that you ran down towards the stove. And we had our door was bedroom door was a padded, studded door. And we had this,
above a pawnbroker's.
Yeah. Yes. We had this little radiator with one bar that heated the room, so we didn't have radiators or anything. And it was so cold in winter. It was really, really freezing. In fact, I set fire to my dressing gown one night on this radiator. But it was electric one. You just plugged it in. But it was a start. It was all I could afford at the time, and I had to find a job and just tempt for a couple of months, I think, and then got a full-time job with this accountancy firm for 18 months. And then I thought, right, got enough money. I'm out of here, and that's when I thought, right, I'm going travelling.
The trees were still beckoning.
The trees?
The
trees.
Yes.
The world was beckoning beyond the trees.
Yes. So Australia is where you headed next.
It was via roundabout routes, one of these trail finders, round the world tickets.
Okay.
Very exciting. So going through Canada, across Canada, down the west side of the States to Tahiti, then to New Zealand, then to New Caledonia. New Zealand, we were there I was travelling with another friend at that point. We stopped there, we did... I didn't do secretarial work there. I was a chambermaid and washed dishes at a place called Edgewater Resort in Wanaka, for those who may know the South Island in New Zealand. And that was enough to pay for our ski passes to go skiing. And we used to hitch a ride up to the ski fields.
Oh,
and we were staying with this family, and they had boots and skis our size, so we didn't have to hire skis and boots. And it was a fantastic time. A sense of freedom as well, which was... and fun. And then from there to New Caledonia for just a few days, actually, so not for very long, and then to Australia. And by the time I got to Australia, I was stony broke, so I had to work. So I started working.
All the savings had gone from the accountant, and there's other temping jobs in London, etc. And okay.
Yes.
And how long did you travel for before you arrived in Australia? Places?
So it was probably about 3 or 4, 5 months, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and then arrived in.
So that was
Australia.
that was backpacking, broken up with the job in New Zealand and chambermaiding and things.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. We spent quite a bit of money in New Zealand, actually. just enjoying life, really.
Yeah.
It was but it was fun. And then got to Australia, and then you're paying rent, so you can't. If all the money's going towards paying rent, you've got to have something coming in. So then that's when I started doing secretarial temping. I worked for AMP right on Circular Quay, right on the harbour front.
Wow.
Yeah. And
so in Sydney, yes.
In Sydney, yes. Yeah. So Sydney became my base for quite a few months.
And those administrational skills were coming back to help you then?
They did, came back. I mean, a lot of people did fruit picking and stuff, but I didn't need to do that because I earned more doing
working at an investment insurance company.
Yeah, yeah. And then I got enough money, collected enough money together, and then went around Australia for about, 6 months, I think. Took my time.
Was that more backpacking, or did
you?
Backpacking
all the way. And you just met so many people on the way. And Australia's a huge, huge country, and we just doing everything by the bus, the old Greyhound bus. Toured around Australia and then came back to Sydney, worked again to get myself back home. So I was actually away for almost 2 years, about 20 months, I think.
Wow,
so nearly 2 years. Yeah.
Well, proper travelling, as they say, backpacking and living in a couple of different places. Yeah. Obviously, Sydney.
Went back through the Philippines and went to Hong Kong, China, and then flew back from Hong Kong to London. So I missed out on, originally the ticket was going to take me through Thailand and India, the usual ticket, but I actually sent those parts of my ticket back because I was having such a good time in Australia. I'd met an Australian guy at the time, so I ended up staying there for a lot longer than I had initially thought I would be there. Yeah, so India I still haven't been to. It's on the list. But Thailand I have since.
They say you haven't travelled until you've been to India or properly travelled. So we will have to go there. And,
I think so. And especially as my mum was born there, it's another reason to go.
Yes. Well, it's an experience, and but I know you'd thrive in it.
I probably will, hopefully.
So Sydney and Australia, could you see yourself returning there and living there? As one says in doing this interview, on a day that it's been snowing and it's cold, and short January days still here in England.
I loved Australia. I loved Sydney, and I loved the people. I love the lifestyle, but I think it's changed quite a lot. I did go back to Australia quite a few times since then. I've been back 2 or 3 times to different parts, and I've always loved going there, but I've never seen myself living there full time forever. I think it's an interesting question. Where do you want to live? And even living in London,
yes.
you live where your community is, where you feel most comfortable.
Where your tribe is the trendy way to sort of the people use these days.
Exactly, and I mean wherever my tribe is, that is a moving feast in itself. And I feel wherever I live in the world, I adapt. I find I adapt very, very quickly to wherever I am.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't necessarily ever believe I'm going to be there forever.
Okay.
And I think that's probably, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I envy, in some ways, people who find their place and they're very comfortable there. They have their community and they don't seem to want anything else or anything more.
And as we, anybody that knows us, or as we sort of suggested, that even here, being both of us having lived in London for a long time, I mean, I think we both feel this is like an interim thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's also not really knowing where is next, but you know it when you get there. And sometimes you've got to go and do a bit of exploring till you find where you feel comfortable and where you feel is home forever. How long
you need to play, don't you?
Is,
Travelling is playing in many ways, I guess. And you played with Australia, I guess, and you need to play and come alive and explore and experience. I think. Yeah,
I have in my mind a place that I haven't yet been to, and it's a place that has somewhere that I can cultivate with fruit trees and olives or nut trees and that can be so many places in the world, and a stone house either on one level and there's a lot of sunshine and there's not a lot of mosquitoes. That's the place I'm searching for somewhere in the world. That place exists, I know it does, but I haven't found it. Not that I've actually been looking for it specifically, but I know when I find it, I want to be there.
Sounds great. Can I come?
Of course you can.
Oh, fantastic.
Let's pack our bags. But the thing is, we go to the airport, we can't go anywhere at the moment.
Well, you need a good reason.
We do.
Moving, I think, is one of them. Moving and emigration, luckily, is one of them. So yes, so we'll see. But so Australia, and travels for around 20 months, and then you return to London. Am I right in saying that?
I returned to London and I got a job with a travel company that actually organise events for orchestras and choirs and big groups of people going to different parts of the world. But I did that for 3 or 4, maybe 6 months, I think, and then I realised this isn't what I want to do. And at that point, I just decided it was time to do something different, and I have this real urge to do up houses and get involved in the cultural heritage world. I didn't know how I was going to do that, but so I phoned the National Trust up and I said, do you take on people and train them how to get involved in doing up old houses and buildings and stuff? And she said, no, you have to go and do a building surveying degree. And I went, oh, what's that? That didn't exist when I was at school. And she said, well, go and have a look at the universities. They'll be recruiting, and see whether you can get on a course. Come back to us when you've finished. And that's what I did.
Wow. Gosh, career beckoned.
A career beckoned, yes.
So, I wanted to mix things up a little now, Emma, as I think good to just take a slight sidestep.
Okay.
What are you reading at the moment?
Ooh, good question. I'm not reading a fictional book. I'm reading a non-fiction book by Dr. Stephen Gundry. It's called The Plant Paradox 30, I think. And it's all about a change of lifestyle in terms of the foods you eat, and in relation to diet. Not diet as in terms of losing weight, but diet in terms of the balance of eating more green leafy vegetables, less protein, less sugars, to help with feeling tired, run down, in the world of so many new modern diseases, including cancer and autoimmune diseases. I'm just interested in how this may affect me and whether it helps me feel better in life. And so far, I did the 30-day program back last October, and it was great. It was just it had a huge effect on me, and I've carried on with it. So now I'm interested in reading more of the background behind his ideas, but also exploring more about other people who he also has connected with about this whole lifestyle. change of how we eat foods and that link between how that affects your gut and microbiome, which is now such a catchy word in 2021.
It seems to be everyone's onto it.
Yes.
Including me.
Including
but thanks
you.
to you.
Yes.
And
Are you in the second book, are you?
The longevity one now, which is a lot more into the science behind the first book, which is more kind of quick action 30-day program, as you say. But no, I'm feeling benefits. Definitely lost some weight, and my acid reflux has gone. Didn't need any of the medicine and drugs which are prescribed by the health professionals. It's gone with diet, and I was a little bit apprehensive with the diet because it seemed sort of initially quite harsh, but it's not as you go through it. But it does require a little bit of change with diet, of course. Just quickly, can you tell me what you drink first thing in the morning and what do you drink on an evening?
First thing in the morning, first of all, it's a glass of hot water with a bit of cold in it so I can drink it easily. I usually have that with a vitamin C tablet. And then I have a couple of black coffees. And then in the evening, I drink hot water as well, or cold water, and have a glass of wine, 2 glasses of wine maybe. Yeah, which I thoroughly enjoy with my meal.
Well, luckily Dr. Stephen Gundry in his books, he endorses red wine.
He does, yes, the polyphenols.
Yeah, so alcohol in that sense is good. And as I say, I was a little bit apprehensive with some of the diet because he's a big advocate for removing grains, isn't he?
Yes.
Because of these proteins called lectins, and they're prevalent in things like beer, for example. And I like beer and real ale, but red wine is a nice substitute. So, and obviously it goes well with food.
Yeah, no, definitely. Actually, what surprised me is that you haven't drunk any Coca-Cola since you started.
Good point. And I was a massive Coca-Cola fan.
Addict.
Yes, I was. So sugar's been cut down because of that. And I think I have more energy, but it is definitely with weight. I know I've lost weight. I'm back down. I think I'm back down to 10 stone now, which is my sort of been my fighting weight for most of my adult life. So that's good. So we're going to come on to your career, but you're someone that's done things a little sort of backwards round front, in that you went to university later and went into the working world earlier. So I was just wondering, how would you describe yourself as different to sort of your peers or your associates or people you've worked with? I mean, would you describe yourself as different, the way you think, or what common piece of advice do you disagree with people who you worked with or associates?
Yeah, interesting. I don't think I've really ever thought about it that much. I've always just got on with my path, and I know I've done things upside down and back to front, and but I think it hasn't affected where I wanted to go. If I've wanted to go in a certain direction, I've tried to work out a way to get there. I think I've always been open for things. I've never seen anything as being forever.
Okay.
I think that's probably based on a number of experiences I've had in my youth and growing up. So I've always had my radar up, and my peripheral vision is quite wide. So although I'll be very focused on projects when I do it, and I love a challenge, and I love to succeed.
I've noticed.
I really like to get my teeth into something, and I will give it my all. But then it's also knowing when to stop, if the challenge is too big or you've reached it, and know when to let go and say, okay, this doesn't have to be forever. There are other things to do.
And have you experienced that in the workplace where you're perhaps, as you say, feel a bit more open about things, or where something seems that there's a challenge, but you haven't, as you say, you haven't seen you've looked at a project in a different way because you haven't seen it as being permanent.
Okay. I mean, when I first started even doing the building surveying degree, my mum said to me, I was struggling in the first year because everything was new, learning how to do design, draw, and all technical drawing and everything. It's something I'd never done at school or anything.
Okay.
And I remember saying to me, you can always, you don't have to do it. You can always stop. for me, that was like red rag to the bull. It was like, no, I'm not going to stop. I want to do this. It's a challenge. It's hard, but I'll find a way. And I suppose that's always been my attitude. And working then as a building surveyor in what was in the mid 90s, and still is, but it's becoming more balanced, is a very male dominated world. Although in conservation building surveying there's more women in that field. That's quite tough, and just your relationships in that world, in a kind of multidisciplinary field. And that was a real lesson on being a woman in what was considered, or what is considered still very much a man's world, although it is changing quite considerably now. And then I had the opportunity to go to the Balkans, which, I mean, talk about baptism of fire, going into a world which is very, very macho, very male dominated. And I was heading a team that was at the beginning all men from different sections of society and different cultural and ethnic backgrounds. And that was incredibly challenging, but also very humbling. So I've never been afraid to take on a challenge. And I think you just have to it all goes back to your gut feeling on things. And also knowing when something isn't right, and knowing when to say, okay, let's just bow to this one gracefully. I've done what I can, and never see it as a failure, just see it as part of that learning experience and moving on. And treating everything that, everything we do in life, we have successes and we have failures, and it's being able to see what you recognise as a success, somebody else may not, but it's your life, only you can lead it, and in the end it's how you feel about it, and forget how everyone else may react to certain things.
Nice answer, thought-provoking.
Thank you.
I like that. So I'm glad you brought up the Balkans, because that's what I wanted to actually ask you about next, Emma. And I believe it was Kosovo where you were first based when you went out there. I mean, obviously, we touched on the fact that you did your career late, and eventually, obviously, the degree took you to the Balkans with your heritage surveying work.
Yes.
But how did you balance your lifestyle and living in Kosovo with that work? Because I know we all know, we're learning that you love travel. So blending those two worlds or separating, how was that?
I think even now, I left in 2009 from Kosovo. I was working there, but I was also working in other Balkan countries at the time. And then I spent a bit of time in Bosnia and Sarajevo for about a year and a half. And you know what? I'm still processing that whole period, because it was so intense. I mean, they'd been through a war.
Yeah.
There's ethnic divisions. There is also this amazing sense of community in the Balkans, and then there's also when I was there, the international environment. So you had the UN there, the Council of Europe were there, OSCE, all these institutions that I had never come across, that were explained to me as acronyms. To begin with, I was totally over my head in terms of all that learning curve, learning and NGOs from all over the Balkans too. So although it was you were dealing with or working with individuals, locals from each of these countries, you were also working with people from all over the world. And yeah, it was a very challenging, humbling, and a privilege really to be able to have that opportunity to be in that kind of environment. But I am still processing it, and because it was so intense. And I think also that there was a lot of politics going on. There was so much going on. I think what I need to do is write it down at some point. I wrote various at various times while I was out there. But in the end, it became so intense I couldn't even write it down. So what I did do at the end of my working stint there, it was 2009. So it was kind of like 5 years all in, working in that very intense sort of international environment, shall we say.
Sorry, just to interject very briefly, just to so people understand. Obviously, I know, but some of the projects you were working on were historical buildings. Yes.
Yes. So it was all to do with post-conflict conservation work.
Yes.
And helping or working with the institutions, the different local institutions, on creating priority lists for rebuilding or restoring or preserving, all these different words that come into cultural heritage, whether it's important municipality buildings, bridges, the vernacular, like the houses, walls. It's not just looking and churches, temples, mosques, everything. It was looking at all kinds of architecture from something very small to something huge, and defining the criteria for how you prioritise, because it was huge for some of the countries. It was a mammoth task, and having done that, it was then creating pilot projects where money could be used to restore or just protect certain buildings, and then work with the institutions on how they could then find funding for bigger projects to then do major works. And I was involved specifically in a project in Kosovo, which was very challenging but also very rewarding in some ways, and I learned a lot. It was very humbling. I learned a lot about communism, because they had all worked under and had been brought up under a communist system generally, and here I was with my European views, and they were at this crossroads of having to embrace a European approach without necessarily understanding it. They were learning it, and at the same time, for me to work with them, I had to understand the communist approach, because without understanding where they were coming from, it was very difficult to communicate in a way that we both understood one another. So I learned so much from that experience, and I still stay in touch with other people that I work with, for us, because we're all still processing that experience. But what I also learned from it is that in the end, you are an outsider. You're there to help where you can, but it's very easy, and I saw it a lot where people took over and thought that they knew best, being an international, being abroad, feeling that they had more experience or a better understanding of what they thought should be done, without really taking into consideration the people themselves. And that I found quite frustrating at times. But all in all, it was an incredibly humbling experience and privilege to have done that. I'm still processing it, yes.
Yeah, no. What was the experience of touring around the Balkans after your projects had ended, and you had stopped working for the Council of Europe? Part of that processing, or was it more just for the experience of travel?
I think it was a bit of both.
I'm interjecting again, but just to say that for people who won't know, that you drove round the Balkans for 10 weeks, I believe, wasn't it, in a former communist Yugoslavian, what would have been a family car in the 70s, 80s, called a Zastabar.
Exactly.
Just a solo lady travelling around post-war Balkans.
Yeah, no, that's true.
In this little dinky car.
I saw these cars driving around a little bit, particularly in 2004 when I first was out there. Less so by the end of my working stint, shall we say, in the Balkans generally. But yes, it was an idea and a dream to drive one of these cars, and when I finished working there, I was still very hyped up. It was a very intense period of my life, and I felt if I just came back to the UK, at that time I was actually living in Strasbourg, so I was living between Strasbourg and then having long stints in Pristina.
Okay, that's because of
because of the work.
You're working for the European Council with
Council
these projects.
Europe.
Council of Europe,
Yeah.
who are obviously based in Strasbourg.
Yes, exactly. And I knew I wasn't ready to come away from it, and I felt that I hadn't had I didn't have a proper understanding of life outside of working within an international environment within the Balkans. And I thought the only way I could do that was to drive an old Yugoslav car where I probably wouldn't be noticed because there were quite a lot of them on the road, and just drive around inconspicuously. However, that turned out not to be the case, because it turned out that these little cars don't actually go beyond the boundaries of their own countries, well, even their own little communities. And there I was driving one around the Balkans, so I became actually a figure of hilarity and curiosity as well, that I was travelling around in this car. But it did give me an experience and a better understanding of the Balkan people outside of working in this intense environment. And for that, I was so glad I did that, because again, it was a humbling experience, but I had and do have a much better understanding of the people and what a wonderful part of the world it is beyond its politics and war and the general stereotypical expressions that people have around what the Balkans is about. People go there on holiday, particularly to the coast, but it's actually, I was inland a lot, and that's where you see amazing lives, very, very humble lives, people living off the land. And it's very, it's eye-opening, but it's also, it takes you back almost to a world that you almost thought didn't exist anymore, if that makes sense.
A book came out of it, Driving Tito, and so
10 years on,
yes. It was
okay,
but it was a rich experience.
Definitely, yes.
And that comes through in
we must go one day. One day we'll
Yes, well, we will try and find your car. Maybe that's your book 2,
if it's still
or book 3, because yes, you said you're processing the Balkans still.
Yes,
but one final question relating to your time there. What's the highest compliment someone could give you for the work you did there, or just from your time there?
Crikey, a smile, I think.
A smile.
A smile between strangers. A smile of pleasure on people's faces when they see something's been accomplished. It was the simple things that for me was the biggest compliment, from local people, from people that I couldn't necessarily communicate with verbally, but a smile said so much more. That I have many memories of certain things that happened, that the reward and the biggest compliment to me was seeing the smiles on people's faces. Yeah.
Wow. So we're back in the kitchen for part 2. We've got a glass of wine, so hopefully we're a bit more relaxed this evening.
We are.
To find out more about your travels, and specifically I'm interested in your travels around the Balkans. I know something about because of the book. The story created a lot more questions in my mind. I guess the Balkans, conjures up different images for different people. For me, I think of Yugoslavia, when neighbours used to go on holiday to Yugoslavia, but then obviously there was the war, obviously left what you knew in London in a career to go to a macho world. Is that fair to say? And how did that feel?
That's a very good question. It's a very big question as well.
Sorry, yes.
So I think, initially, becoming a building surveyor, particularly in conservation, the last place in the world I expected to end up was the Balkans, but an opportunity arose, and at the time, very naively, I applied for the job there, not really understanding the full extent of what I was entering into in terms of the post-conflict situation and all that entails, and how cultural heritage as a result is very much becomes a very political subject too, which thinking about it is through World War I, World War II, you would always, the monuments, whether churches or cathedrals or bridges were bombed and attacked, and it was always seen as an attack of your cultural heritage. So going out to this region, totally unaware and not very, how should I put it, not familiar with Byzantine churches or the mosques from 14th, 15th, 16th century. That was one side of it. But not only was I going into a world that's very macho, shall we say, but interestingly, there were a lot of women who held quite high positions within the ministries. So I was not alone, really. And in fact, it was more surprising to see that there and I saw more of it there than I had done in this country, in the same field, shall we say.
Interesting.
So although initially I was very much managing a situation and a project that was with architects from different backgrounds and all male dominated, because of the political situation, representations from different parties would change, and then suddenly it would become half and half, women and half male, half female, and then at one point it was actually almost all women. So it changed. So the dynamics changed with that, and each had their challenges. But I don't think it really. I mean, I was there to do a job, and I took it very much from a very practical building surveying point of view, and tried to just keep politics out of it, and just try to do what I could do based on the experience I had, and using the experience and the experiences of the people around me, because they knew a lot more than I did. I knew the sort of European way of how to put document tenders together and get construction work underway alongside a team of people, obviously, but understanding the history and the dynamics behind it all was totally new to me. So we needed each other in a way. I mean, obviously we had many problems, but we had many successes, many laughs, many cries. But it was a very interesting process, and particularly in the international world with other institutions involved. That also was another dynamic which was quite challenging at times to deal with, because I came in very specifically thinking I was doing a project as such. And
that was for the Council of Europe you were employed by?
With the Council of Europe, yes. So I was employed by them.
Running a project?
Yes.
Projects?
So, projects, yeah. And I had my right-hand man, Francisco Montañez, who, if he's listening, hello, was my right-hand man from Spain, a project manager, and he very much was the technical coordinator and project manager on the ground all the time, dealing very much face-to-face with these projects on a day-to-day basis, whereas I was more of the helicopter view of managing the process, the budgets, and the architects and the political situation. So, I mean, it was a very intense period of my life, something that I never thought I would ever be in a position to be doing. And if somebody had told me that I would be doing that at some point in my life, I would have said, you've got the wrong person. But in fact, when you're in there, you just get on with it. And it was a huge learning curve, but a very rewarding learning curve. And 5 years was, for me, enough. It was very intense, and there came a point within the project where I got more money for another phase of the projects. And at that point I decided it was time to sort of come out and let someone else take over from the start of this new tranche of money that was coming from the European Commission and from the Kosovo government as well, for the next phases. And
can you give us an example of one of the projects, and maybe a project that was particularly challenging for you?
Well, we had in one of the towns in Kosovo, Prizren, a beautiful old medieval town, had a main cathedral in the centre of the town, St George's Cathedral, and it was also surrounded by little smaller chapels or churches. So we say one was up on a hill in an area that had actually been destroyed by fire. There was a village, Serbian village up there. And then down in the town there was another smaller chapel. There was also a hammam there as well, which was part of the priority list for Kosovo, but I wasn't involved in that specifically. To do with specifications, yes. And then there was also archaeological sites in the countryside around Prizren and between Prizren and Pristina too. So the cathedral became one of the major projects that I was engaged with, and it involved a lot of people. We had Bulgarian engineer, we had technical team from both Kosovo and from Belgrade, and from the institutions we had wall painting specialists coming from Greece and from Spain, and then we had structural engineers, and we had a UK engineer who came to give some advice. It was a full-on project, and then of course we had all the contractors involved.
And what was the
too.
Restoration work?
So
how had it been damaged? I presume it had been damaged.
Yes, but basically it was a rebuild job. It had the 4 walls, but we had to rebuild the roof and then the whole of the interior. So it was a massive project and involved a lot of cooperation. It was also in the town was also. It was the heart, a very secular town in the sense it had the Orthodox Church there, it had the Catholic Church was there, it had the main mosque with the mufti, and there was also a big population of people who were very very conscious that this was the centre. It was the centre of their city, so it was important historically as well to try and pull it together again. I mean, we had problems at the time with the lead being stolen off the roofs, and materials going missing, payment of contractors, and all of this. But as you do in all projects wherever you are in the world. But eventually, we did make it a functional cathedral. There was also the main bishop's residence was there too, and that was done as a separate project, not by us, but it was separately funded. And there was also a little chapel on the site, Runovic, I think it was called. Gosh, I'm forgetting all the names now. Which is a beautiful, small chapel with a wall-painted ceiling. So it was a lot of conservation work, but it also very challenging in terms of finding the right materials, what do you use, as well as making it a functional cathedral for the future, for people to use going forward. And I haven't been back in the last 10 years actually, so I would be intrigued to know how it's going. I will go back at some point, maybe after the lockdown when everything opens up again. The world opens up and we'll all be on the move, that's for sure.
So yes, I hope so. But so the challenge with that, well, lots of different challenges in terms of managing budget, theft of materials, and managing different institutions and politics, I guess.
Yes, a lot of
and you mentioned obviously, hierarchy of religion there as well.
Yes, definitely, and also, they were still recovering from a period of unrest from 2004, where the riots of 2004 in Kosovo, and before that, the 1999, there was conflict. So there was a lot of people in healing. There was a huge healing process going on. And that was another element to it all. And initially, before any of the work started, we were very much under escort by UN forces and people, escorting me everywhere with guns. And I found actually that was more frightening and more overwhelming than actually the project itself. So that was...
There's the unexpected there.
Yeah, it actually made me very wary.
As you said, with UN bodyguards transporting you around, you're not in control of what could happen, whereas the project, you're leading that project.
Yes, yeah, exactly, yes. So there was those elements of it as well. But it was I was still in this process of kind of downloading my brain of everything that I experienced and learned from that. So it's an ongoing thing, and I think I will write about it all one day. Yeah. But it's
you keep threatening to or promising to.
Yeah, some of it's still quite raw, and some of it's still very sensitive.
Yeah.
So it's being able to find the words as well without offending, and also writing it in a way where hopefully people can understand. I mean, I didn't live through the war. No. I came afterwards, so
you saw the aftermath.
I saw an aftermath, which is very different to actually living through it. And one thing I suppose from not only working on the Kosovo project, but I was working on various consultancy projects around Balkans at the same time. was that process of meeting so many people who were healing from and dealing with huge bereavement and loss. And that was very emotionally challenging at times as well, and made me appreciate and also see bereavement from so many different other sides to a side that I had personally experienced bereavement. So that was also very interesting, and something also that I'm still processing as a result.
Well, it's interesting, as you say, that you're processing it still, and obviously I live with you, and so I know something about that stage of your life, but only when you it comes out, in snippets, and or you maybe you're caught off guard and you reflect, and I know it's still coming out there because I don't know all the story, and of course I can never know all the story of your work life out there and the way that you engaged with the people out there and the different politics. But I know you've told me some interesting little examples of the people you had to deal with, and I guess the only thing I can compare it to, which again isn't the same in some respects, because you said you didn't live through the actual bombings and the war and the division of different races, etc. It was just my grandfather who fought in the Second World War as a young child, curious about war and battles and things, and held his medals. We used to say. He would never talk about the aspects of war. Never as a child, even though me and my two brothers wanted to know. It was more kind of like the fun, jovial things, like a character, a friend of his, or how when they're in Egypt, they used to bet on scorpions fighting, and these things, as opposed to that. So it's interesting. As I said, that's anything I can relate that to. And obviously, it will come out, as you say, when it's ready. But I've always wondered with you then, subsequently, when you finished that job or gave you a notice, and I think it was after 5 years, did you say?
Yes,
roughly.
Yes, yeah.
That you still wanted to stay in the region, and you then went on this kind of madcap adventure for 10 weeks, 10 countries in the Balkans, driving around in this Zastava car, which if anyone's read the book Driving Tito, they'll know about the Zastava car. But tell us about what the Zastava, and why did you want to jump into this car and go on the Balkans after all this other work? Some people would just want to get away if they were wanting to process things.
Yes, yeah. No, I think I saw the car around the Balkans all the time I was out there working. And I heard that it was this Zastava. And it's this tiniest of cars. And they used to say that this is the car that everyone had a story to tell. That either they learnt to drive in it, or their grandfather had one, or they grew up with them in the family. And so in terms of a vehicle or an object as such, you mentioned this vehicle and everybody had a smile on their face, and everyone had a story to tell. And so when I thought, wow, this is just incredible, I just was kind of fell in love with the car. I thought, well, wouldn't it be fun to drive one around? Bit like a Mini, and I suppose it would be very easy to actually find a vehicle. Yeah. But actually that process was quite hard. Wasn't
it the equivalent of a Cinquecento?
A bit, it is. It's like a Cinquecento, yes. So it's like the Italian Cinquecento. It was a factory in Serbia that made these vehicles. So they took the design and adapted it for the Yugoslavian market, really. And the initial ones had doors that opened sort of outwards, a bit like like a Ferrari. But there is a classic Yugoslav film with the Zastava in it, and the names escape me at the moment. Anyway,
which surprises me, given the amount of times you break down in the book.
Well, precisely. Because at that time I thought it'd be no problem, and when I test drove a few of them, I realised actually this journey might not be as easy as I first thought it would be. But I eventually found a car after several searches and set off in this vehicle. And one of my colleagues, he had apparently, I found this out afterwards, had a bet with his mates, a crate of beer. They bet that there was no way that I would make it. So he was all the way encouraging me. Come on, you've got to keep going.
Well, I think that's one of the early parts of the book where all your colleagues were just flabbergasted, it seems, that you wanted to do it. Even the lady who, your colleague who had to buy the car on your behalf because you weren't a national and permanently resident there. So she had to buy it, and then you kind of, then she lent it to you effectively.
Exactly. We had to do the
but she just seemed sort of very perplexed. Why would you want to do it? And was there something in the book that says something? They can't even go up hills, she said. So what would she just didn't get that you wanted this sort of nostalgic vehicle, which I guess represented the Balkans and former Yugoslavia to you.
Yes. I mean, now I've seen there's a Zastava Old Timers Club on Instagram, and I don't know whether they're restoring more of them now, but at one point they were actually encouraging people to return them to the factory, and they were being broken down for scrap. But yeah, where my car is now, I don't know. I hope it's still in Macedonia. I left it with the lady who actually has the official ownership. As you say, I couldn't own it because I wasn't a resident in Macedonia. I had I think it was 3 months sort of certification, so I could just go and drive it. So I knew I had quite a few months ahead of me. But I think at the time when I set off, I left Skopje, which is the capital of the Republic of Macedonia, as it is now. And I was going up this hill, and I was getting slower and slower and slower, and then the lights started blinking, and I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to break down already, and I haven't been away even half a day. It's only been an hour into the journey. And I realised that I had totally misread the petrol gauge. I thought it was full, but it was running on empty. The first thing I had to do was try and find a petrol station to fill it up. And then, of course, I don't speak the language, or not well enough to have a proper conversation. But people helped me out everywhere I went. Yeah, I did break down twice en route, but each time...
You broke down more times than that.
I broke down...
A number of times.
Yeah, I broke down in Greece, and then I broke down again in Bulgaria. And that one was quite a catastrophic breakdown, and I ended up staying in this village, this small town, Samakov, for about 3 or 4 days while it was fixed. I don't know how they found the parts, but they did. and then I managed to get all the way to northern Serbia. So I was crossing between Romania into Serbia towards Subotica, basically. What's it called? Anyway, and the guard came flying out of his hut. There was no one around at all. It was boiling hot. This is the other thing. I set off on this journey in August, and it was like 35 degrees. It was stinkingly hot, and literally I was just sweltered. I mean, the only air conditioning was the windows. I had to have the windows down. It was absolutely baking. And anyway, I arrived at this little border crossing between Romania and Serbia, and this guy he just like flew out of his hut going, it's a miracle. He couldn't believe that a Zastava with a Macedonian number plate had managed to reach as far north as his little border control crossing. So there I was, more concerned at that point whether I'd be allowed in, because I had been doing all this work in Kosovo, and there was a lot of, at the time, political unrest between Kosovo and Serbia, and every border crossing that I did onto the Serbian side was an absolute nightmare. So I was
and
a bit
plus your
terrified.
paperwork was a bit dodgy as well, given you didn't own the vehicle, I think.
Well, exactly. But the fact that I was so far north, he was more interested in the Zastava.
Great.
And it was just, I realised then I was totally unhooked from the whole international environment and that work environment, and I was just a traveller and a tourist.
Yes.
So that was great. That made me relax, and in Serbia there was so many Zastavas. I felt like I'd come home to the land of Zastavas as I travelled through.
So did you feel a bit more anonymous then in that car?
That's what I thought I would feel,
Mm-hmm.
but in fact the opposite was true, because the number plate gave the car away that I was far from home.
Okay, yes.
And then so people would look in and they couldn't believe that this car was on the road. And so then, because they saw the car, then they would see me and they go, "What's she doing?"
How old was the car? Sorry.
It was 31 years old.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Gosh.
Vintage.
Yes.
Vintage, a classic car. And honestly, at some points, like going uphill, I could only do about 20 kilometres an hour, and I'd have to stop regularly because it would overheat. So the engine was at the back, a bit like in a Beetle. So I'd have to stop the car, put a brick behind the back wheels because the brakes weren't that good, and throw the back door of the engine door.
The bonnet?
No, the boot.
Oh, the boot, where the engine was in
And
like a VW.
let it basically cool down. So there are quite a lot of mountains in
Yes.
the Balkans. So there was a lot of mountain and climbing. And in the end, because it became an issue, I actually had to start rethinking my route around the Balkans to try and avoid the steepest parts.
Right.
Because I knew the car might not survive otherwise. The further I got, the more I realised how fragile the car was, and I had to be very aware of its limitations, shall we say.
So here you are then, a solo female traveller in what I was insinuating, at least in my image, is sort of quite a male world. As you're suggesting, maybe not as institutions, it's not so male dominated, but you're going through the back roads, towns and villages, not to a lot of the big main cities.
Yes.
It was more rural. Was it more traditional in that sense? And what was it like? I want to have a feel for that in the book, but you rock up at some hotels, restaurants, and there were times when you were just the only woman, it seemed, or person, at least person on their own, eating in the restaurant and not speaking their language. And did you feel intimidated, or did you feel like you had to push yourself at the time? And if so, what made you keep going on?
I think, initially I was so concerned about the car and so excited to be on the road.
Yeah.
I didn't think about it too much. I was very aware at certain places, at cafes, it's very male dominated, and I knew that anyway. So I got used to going into these places, and yes, it was always a bit nerve-wracking going in as the only woman, because obviously you're a novelty and you've got this car. But I always used to try and get a table near the back of the room or in a corner or a place, and I have my maps with me and a book, because the other problem was, especially in smaller places, I couldn't communicate with people, and that was something actually at the start I thought, should I have really gone with somebody to have a translator to help with the communication?
Because presumably you must have had a translator sometimes when you were doing these projects.
All the time, yeah.
Right.
It was imperative.
Dealing with locals and different institutions.
Different people, yes, exactly. I mean, a lot of people did speak English, but many didn't also.
Right.
And also, I didn't speak enough, hardly any of the Albanian or Serbian or Croatian or whatever, to be able to speak to them eloquently, apart from saying hello, good morning, thank you, goodbye, good day. But yes, on the road, so it was a similar thing, that there was no way to communicate with people unless they spoke a bit of German or a bit of French, in which case I could get by with that. And then obviously some people did speak English. But the further inland I went, the less I would come across that. So it was very much sign language and smiling and pointing, and in one village the woman was so frustrated because she couldn't work out what I was trying to say, that we went to the local tourist office, and she went on the computer, and we talked to each other through Google through a Google translation, which and all I really wanted was something to eat. She said she couldn't work out what I was trying to. She wanted to know specifically, and I couldn't describe that. But no, I think at times it was a bit intimidating, and I was very careful. I was very aware of being a single woman, or solo traveller as it were. And a lot of time, although I had a mobile phone with me, there was no signal. Nobody knew where I was. So in some ways it was intrepid in some ways, exhilarating in others, a bit freaky and scary at times, but generally speaking it was great, it was liberating, and it just gave me an insight into a world that I hadn't been able to experience while I had been working with an international hat on, shall we say, a Council of Europe hat on my head, because it just didn't give me that opportunity. Although I did meet some lovely people in Kosovo, local people that we ate well, but you were there playing, you were in a role, and there were certain things expected of you. Whereas once I had sort of taken that cloak off, I was just Emma, and I could
just a traveller.
I was just a traveller, and that opened up other opportunities. And I think it was a very humbling experience as well, because you realise how many people, particularly inland, they don't have much. But what they do have, they are so happy to share with you, whether it's a coffee or plums off the tree or an apple or just a smile and a wave or whatever it is. It was enough to keep me very much motivated in my journey and discovery of that the whole landscape and world.
So did you see the people of the Balkans differently than what you saw them before when you were working? Appreciate obviously there's different nationalities and different countries.
I mean, I think it is different. I mean, it's because I saw people, I saw their kindness while I was working. Of course I did. But it was a different kind of intensity because there was so much pressure on the work, and it was so political, and everybody had an agenda way beyond, you know, the role that I could play. So, but it was still so it was good to have experienced that and understand the pressure that people were under there too. But also to get as far away from that as possible and to understand the context of the Balkans in a much wider way and the history behind it, because the history is fascinating. And I think it's also, for me, I found it very frustrating because I felt the more I understood or thought I understood, the more I realised I understood nothing. So it is a very, very complicated world. And fascinating, and it gets under your skin, but there's something very compelling about it too that is very heartwarming, and the people in the community, particularly in the smaller places and in the villages and the towns, they're just beautiful people. They're just beautiful in the sense of the way they are and how comfortable they are within where they are. I mean, obviously there's other places that are war-torn and it's a disaster, and it's a very, very sad to see. And I'm hoping, you know, I did this journey in 2009, so already it's 10, 11, coming up for 12 years. And I'm hoping in that time that a lot will have changed in many of those areas. But I don't really know. I mean, obviously life goes on, and I've done lots of other things since, and I'm sure some of them have too. But that's also, again, is the humbling thing, is as me with a born in this country rather than there. I could go, I could work, and I could leave. Some people could never leave. Yeah. They had no ticket out, and that's humbling, and also makes you realise how privileged many of us are, and to respect the privilege that we have and hopefully use it wisely.
Maybe though, as you suggested, you know, some of the simpler life might be the better life.
Sometimes it is. I think.
You say a smile, a lot of smiles. You suggest.
Yes, yeah, and people the skills people had.
Okay.
In just whether it was in gardening, carpet making, the whole
being ingenious and fixing Zastava,
exactly.
30-year-old vehicles, and they arrive in their little one town, got a little mechanic or whatever, because, you know, there's a number of stories there, and they were ingenious with finding alternative parts and fixing it. Or sometimes the male bravado of actually thinking they knew how to fix the vehicle and they didn't.
Well, exactly. I know that certainly went on a bit. But also there was one person, a guy who actually I met in Belgrade. He had worked partially. He was a wall paintings expert, and he said, you know, Emma, it doesn't matter where you are.
He was a what expert? Sorry?
He was a wall paintings specialist.
Okay, so you had a connection with him, or you knew him from before?
I knew him before. So where I could, I did actually try to catch up with people in different places. I met up with people in Serbia and Croatia, in Macedonia, obviously, Bulgaria too. Yeah, he said, Emma, it doesn't matter where you are with a Zastava. If you break down, you have no worries, because you can fix this car with a teaspoon. So I felt kind of, I think I felt comforted by that statement, but I would prefer not to have broken down. But my final breakdown was almost the penultimate day of my trip, where the brakes failed after I'd just come through a very, very steep mountain pass, and I was coming back down.
Yes, I remember.
And I realised I got away with my life there, definitely. Anyway, I'm here to tell the tale.
You are indeed, thankfully. But that leads me on to a bigger, broader question about surviving something like that. Do you think you're a better or a different person because of your time and your experiences in the Balkans?
Oh, I think that question about whether I'm better, I'm better at what, I don't know, but certainly.
Or if you know is it better, or you've got a better understanding about life, maybe. Or you're just different.
I think the core of me is still the same. I think it gave me an opportunity to find out a bit more about what I could and couldn't do. I was put into a lot of situations, very challenging situations mentally, that I had to overcome very quickly on the spot.
Okay.
And that was, you do it, and I think also I was absorbing a lot of information and a lot about people's lives, a lot about the war, a lot about politics, and it was this. I almost felt like I was this kind of bubbling cauldron, and everything was being thrown in, and it was all being melted down in there. This is why I say I'm still kind of processing it all, because a lot of people told me things that they didn't want anybody else to know about, whether that was true or not, whether they did tell lots of other people. But when people say that to me, I don't pass it on. You know? And so in some ways it was also very difficult to pigeonhole certain information. Some things, some stories have stayed with me and haunted me a little bit. You know, I had some difficult moments while working there, and I think not growing up with guns and war and the terror around it, even though I wasn't in it, I was still quite frightened by it underneath it all, I think. Yeah. So initially when I came back, on the first time, I had nightmares for about 2 months afterwards. And
gosh, you never told me that before.
Yeah, so that was, and I think that was my brain processing. I used to get horrendous headaches too, but that all passed, and then I went back for a second stint, and I think maybe so I processed quite a bit then too, and I think it taught me a lot about institutions as well, and the UN and how systems work. And about the larger community, and how to work with people from all different parts of the world, all speaking a kind of English, but everybody has their own type of English, and how you find a way where everybody can understand one another without everyone getting upset by one's idiosyncrasies, and that was really interesting to work with as well as adapt to, I suppose is the way. So coming back and setting up a bookshop, I wanted it to be something about community as well, because I just appreciated too how much community was here in London that I hadn't really realised was here. I was so caught up in my own little conservation building surveying world in London, which is very small really compared to the bigger picture which London is. And my little bookshop, it wasn't the biggest bookshop and cafe in the world, but the doors were open to welcome anyone and everyone from wherever they were, from all parts of the world, and I loved that was a wonderful experience. And I think
there was anybody was welcome. You felt that there was no sort of I don't know, for lack of a better term, eliteness. It was just there were books in there for everyone.
Yes.
And obviously there was a focus on people and place, and the bar and cafe was a place to meet. But I think anyone felt comfortable in there, whoever they were.
I think. Well, I'm glad you say that. Yeah. I think that was the aim, and I don't.
I hung about for,
you did
so I must have felt comfortable there.
I think also it was more a case that it was also a case that if I hadn't had the experience I'd had in the Balkans, I probably would have been more reserved and less. How can I say this? Less. I felt it was my place, and everyone was welcome, and we had an ethos, and that was down to the staff at Travelling Through too. They were all wonderful people, and they came from different parts of the world, from Italian, Mexican, French, British. The customers were from all over the world.
They were Londoners, so they're from everywhere.
Yeah, Londoners,
including
but
London.
also travellers. So, and from that point of view, it was open to everyone, and it was a very rewarding experience. And I'm so glad I did it, because it was a dream that I'd had for many years, that had gone from just being a bookshop in the traditional sense to something a lot more. And the spirit lives on.
Yes, it certainly does. But it's different experiences and different careers that you've had, with obviously your temping administrational work earlier in life, to getting qualified as a surveyor, taking you to the Balkans, and then having a dream to open a bookshop, which I know had been with you for a long time, and then obviously you're ready to do it after a certain period in the Balkans. But I think something so interesting about you is that you do follow your dreams, and it appears that you follow your dreams, or once you've got an idea in your mind, like, yes, I'm going to travel the Balkans in an old car that breaks down all the time. I mean, are you different to other people, do you think? What makes you push on like that?
I'm not sure, really. Sometimes I think I just have an idea and I just go with it, and I don't think about it too much. I just do it, because I think sometimes you can talk yourself out of something if you have too much. Well, I can certainly, and sometimes when I just get so excited by an idea, I just go and do it, and I don't think about anything that can go wrong. I plan as much as I can, in the sense that I'm not going to be completely stupid about it, but I just go and give it a go. And I think most things we do in life you can do, and you won't come to much harm. And if you do, well, you take that as it comes. But if you always think of everything that might go wrong, you just won't do anything. And for me, life's too short. I can't plan too far ahead. That's just me. I just live for the day. Do I know what I'm doing next week? Absolutely no idea whatsoever.
I love that, because compared, we're very different in many ways. That I have ideas, I want to do things, and I think I can overanalyze them, the downside too much, and that's my element of procrastination, trying to find reasons why I can't, as opposed to reasons why I should. And I think you seem to have mastered that to an extent. Some might say it's foolhardy at times, going around as a solo traveller around the Balkans, but it hasn't impeded your life, it seems.
No, I think also, I think in your gut you know if you really want to do it or not.
Yeah.
If you're starting to analyse something, I think that means that really underneath it all you don't want to do it. Because when you really want to do something, you'll just do it. Well,
you do.
I do. Maybe we need to do a poll, get some other people in to talk about this, because I don't believe I'm any different to anybody else. For me, life is short, and it can be cut short, and so live it to the best that you can, because you only get one chance at this, and no one else can live your life for you. Only you can live your life. So it's up to you, really. And it doesn't necessarily mean going out and being adventurous all the time. I enjoyed last summer just growing beetroot and vegetable and carrots while the slugs ate them all. But just that was an adventure too. You don't.
Well, again, you threw yourself into that, which is great.
Yeah, and I think adventures.
I got to benefit from the ones that didn't get eaten by the slugs.
You did. And adventures start from your doorstep.
Yeah.
And it's up to you how far you go. And I don't think you have to go very far to have an adventure and just maybe get out of your comfort zone, or just to put a smile on your face and just make you feel good about life, because there is a lot to be grateful for. And it's very, very easy to get bogged down in everyday things. But everyday things are, yes, everyone has to do them, but save some moments. It doesn't have to be much to have even if it's a little mini adventure once a week. It just gives you a spark, and it just gets you to meet people and talk to people in different ways too. And just get outside your comfort zone sometimes.
Well, it feels like an adventure, even though we know each other so well. That we have been having today, just delving back into your life. I've definitely learnt some things which I didn't know about you.
I've enjoyed talking about this. There's so much more to say. I hope it's interesting to people to listen to. And if they're interested in having a look at the book, it's called Driving Tito. In fact, I've forgotten what it's called. What's it called? Driving Tito. Through the Balkan backroads with a celebrity.
How did you forget? We had an afternoon in a London pub brainstorming.
We did the title, exactly. Yeah,
remember the coal hole on the Strand?
Hole, that's right.
Yes, drinking a couple of pints of Guinness, I believe, when we were we were going over that title.
But,
and that where is the book available, Emma?
Online. You can find it on my website, travellingthrough.co.uk. It'll have the links to there, or you can buy it through a bookshop.
For all the usual outlets. You can order online for Waterstones then, and in the States, Barnes and Noble. Is it available?
I believe it is Barnes and Noble, and Amazon obviously. It's also in Kindle version.
Yeah.
And Apple Books and all the other every kind of variety pack of style you can find. It's
out there. There's no escape.
It is out there, exactly. So I suppose just going forward. Obviously, this is a difficult time for everybody, but the podcast is kind of something, a work in progress too, and it's called the Travelling Through podcast. And the idea eventually is hopefully that we'll find somewhere that will have a bit of a space that will carry on that travelling through spirit that we had in Lower Marsh in Waterloo. For people to come in SE1, that's right. For people to come on a retreat or to camp or to
pick a book off a shelf.
Pick a book off the shelf. Who knows? But certainly when we find this place, you will know all about it because we'll be talking.
And the podcast, just remind us of the name and the best places to listen to access the podcast.
So it's called the Travelling Through podcast, and again you can find the links through my website, travellingthrough.co.uk. It's
travelling with 2 L's.
2 L. Oh yeah, travelling with 2 L's and through spelt the English way, THROUGH.co.uk. So you can find the podcast is on Apple Podcasts, it's on Google Play, it's on Stitcher, it's on a lot of the mediums, but you can access them through the website too. So, and also I've got a newsletter, so if you want to sign up to the newsletter to find out more about what's going on, you can find the links to that via my website also. So I've got all points covered.
Excellent. Wow. I mean, I don't know, maybe a little drum roll to say thank you, Emma Carmichael.
Thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure talking to you here on this podcast, and good luck with your podcast.
Thank you.
For those of you who made it to the end of this podcast, I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about my life. If you've enjoyed it, please do share with your friends, subscribe, and give us a rating if you can. We look forward to sharing a new podcast with you very soon. But for now, take care and thanks for listening.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.